Right, so welcome to the second episode in our discussion on the key issues that the chief examiner raises concern on and how we can then position ourselves to be able to pass the examination. In the first episode, we looked at the issue in relation to financial reporting and corporate reporting. In case you missed that, you can check the podcast playlist and you'll be able to get access to that. On the episode today, we want to look at management accounting and the concerns that the chief examiner of management accounting has raised and how we can prevent ourselves from being exposed to those challenges so that we can ultimately pass the examination. Now, one of the things that you need to understand generally in management accounting is that it depends on how excited the examiner is, but we are likely to going to be having either 40-60, that is 40% written or comment questions, and then 60% calculation questions in the exam hall, or 30-70, all depending on how excited the examiner is. But one thing that you have to understand is that English is very crucial when it comes to management accounting. Your ability to be able to read the print and state exactly or understand exactly the requirements of the question will either help you to either pass the examination or not pass the examination at the end of the day. And so that is what I intend to share with you on the podcast today as we continue with our discussion for the examination. So, a couple of things first, like I said, that you need to take note of and pay attention to is the structure of the exams. So, I'm going to share a couple of things with you, then we will go to the chief examiner's report so that you understand what we are talking about. So the structure of the exams, like I mentioned, will be dependent on how excited that the examiner is. We could have either, like I said, 40%, 60%. Alternatively, we could have 35, 65. That is the greater percentage taking a calculation area. So it means that there are a lot of written comments or theory questions that the examiner is going to be throwing at us in the exam hall. And it is important you understand these theory or written questions so you can really position yourself to pass the examination. Number two, it's about English language. Yes, I know you speak something that sounds like English and you hear something that also sounds like English. But when it comes to management accounting, it is important you be able to read the print, you be able to read the question to, number one, know the requirements of the question. So you need to have an understanding of the requirements of the question. Very important. And then number two, you have to be able to interpret the question in relation to what exactly you're supposed to do. And it depends on how excited the examiner is, like I said, but we're going to be having questions coming in from all aspects of the syllabus that you need to understand. There is going to be question on short-term decisions, and there are a lot of short-term decisions there that you must know about: make or buy, limiting factor analysis, relevant cost analysis, throughput accounting ratio. All of these things are there, shutdown decisions, all these things are there under short-term decisions. There will be questions on that. You have to understand the principles because under short-term decisions, we are going to be applying the marginal costing principle. So your best bet is to understand the marginal costing principle because that is how you'll be able to actually position yourself to ultimately pass the exams in that particular case. Then we're going to be having questions on variance analysis. We're going to have questions on budgeting. We're going to have questions on performance measurement. That's question one, all other things being equal. We're going to be having questions on investment appraisal. So each aspect of the syllabus, we're going to be having questions coming in from there. But a key question you need to ask yourself is, what are the principles that underline each of these topics? And am I in a position to be able to ultimately pass the examination? And for all these questions, that is what I'm saying. It depends on how excited the examiner is in this particular examination diet. It could be 40% theory, 60% computation, or 30% theory, 70% computation. But what I want you to note is that there is a significant portion of theory because if the examiner even go for 30-70, 30% of written questions, it's really crucial. It's really important. It means that in as much as you have to understand all the calculation aspects, you have to also spend time reading, looking at the theories, because under each of these topics that I've listed here are going to be a lot of theories that you need to understand, that you need to know about. So it is important you position yourself well under each of the topics, understand the basic principles in the computational aspect, but most importantly, ensure also that you are in the position to be able to really apply in the exam hall. So you must understand the structure of the exams, how it's going to be. Number two, your English language, very crucial. I cannot overemphasize that in that particular case. These are a couple of general issues that you must understand when it comes to dealing with management accounting. But let's now transition and go into the chief examiner's report, and I'm going to be using about 3 different examination dates, chief examiner's reports, to try to draw or bring home the discussion in relation to the concerns that the chief examiner has raised and what we can do in order to position ourselves to pass the examination. So this is November 2019. Now, before even I bust your bubbles on the chief examiner's report, let me say this. The pass rate for the management accounting on the average, it's really very low. I mean, sometimes at most like 30%. What does that mean? It means you take 10 people in a room, 3 will pass, and definitely 7 will fail the exam, period. You put 100 people in the room, 30 will pass, 70 are in the math. You know that already. So the pass mark here is really small. But that doesn't mean it's impossible. And the reason why the pass mark is very small, it's a couple of the things that students fail to understand, as I've shared with you, and as the chief examiner has raised some concern on, that will be covering in a moment. So it is important you understand this. So this is November 2019, the chief examiner's report. And the chief examiner raised some concerns when it comes to dealing with this particular thing. And like I said, I'm going to be using a couple of examination dates, 3 to be specific, to really draw home the challenges that the chief examiner has raised concern on, and then how you can position yourself to be able to then pass the examination. The performance of the candidates were considered unsatisfactory, meaning it is smelling, right? The following are the problems identified by the examiner. 1, lack of clarity and poor presentation of answers by candidates. This is important. This is the issue in relation to handwriting and presentation, okay? And presentation. Very, very important. And I'm always on my students on handwriting and presentation, because people just write anyhow. People just present anyhow. And the devastating aspect is that a lot of people have poor handwriting. Now, if you have poor handwriting, you cannot just write anyhow, because people with beautiful handwriting can present better, all other things being equal. Because if your handwriting is not good and you're using a bad pen and your presentation is poor, and whatever you are presenting cannot be logically seen. So probably in your head, you are writing the correct thing. You are giving the appropriate answer, but there is no clarity. Everything you've done is just not making sense. That way, if it can't be read, if it cannot be understood, you have lost the marks. Then you fail the exams at the end of the day. So as you are going into this particular examination, put yourself in the position where you will be able to present well, and you'll be able to what? Have a clear presentation in the exam hall. This is why in our institution here, we do performance evaluation tests, we give assignments, we'll be doing mock examination, and we practice a lot of questions, because the purpose of it is so we try to streamline people to get a better handwriting as they prepare for the exams, and number 2, to be able to know the presentation rules that they have to follow to optimize their chances of ultimately passing the examination. So that is the first concern that the chief examiner raised in relation to why students perform unsatisfactorily. Number 2, lack of understanding of principles and concepts of management accompanying and poor interpretation of results. Basic principles. That is what I mentioned earlier in that particular case. You must understand the basic principles in management accounting. What are the basic principles in management accounting? Number 1, the marginal costing principle. I cannot overemphasize the importance of this principle. If you're a follower of my work, and I've spoken about this over and over again, you know that this is something that is primary. You need to understand the marginal costing principle. Why? Because 1, there is profit statement, preparation. And we can prepare the profit statement using the marginal costing principle. 2, under short-term decisions, all the short-term decisions that we are going to be making, make or buy, shutdown decision, limiting factor analysis, relevant cost analysis, all those short-term decisions, we are going to be using the marginal costing principle. 3rd, investment appraisal. When we are in the investment appraisal, we are going to be applying the relevant costing principle, and the relevant costing principle is based on the marginal costing principle. So in investment appraisal, you're going to be applying the marginal costing principle. Variance analysis. When it comes to variance analysis, you're going to be applying the marginal costing principle because calculation of the overhead variance, okay? O/H is overhead. Calculation of the overhead variance depends on whether the entity is using the marginal costing principle or the absorption costing principle. So the overhead variance, it is important you know where we are at. And even the sales variance, we have to know the environment that we are in to be able to calculate the sales volume variance in that particular case and the sales quantity variance in that particular case. So the marginal costing principle will be applicable there. Then the next thing is going to be the issue in relation to the reconciliation statement, the preparation of the reconciliation statement. That is the next one. The reconciliation statement that will be prepared, it will be different from if we are in the marginal costing principle and if we are in the absorption costing principle. So you realize that throughout the syllabus, you are applying the marginal costing principle. And then finally, the issue in relation to performance measurement. When you're dealing with performance measurements, the concept of transfer pricing, the marginal costing principle will come to town because you would have to look at it. If you are calculating the transfer price and the department that is doing the transfer is having limited resources, there is a way that we have to calculate the minimum transfer price. If they have unlimited resources, there is a way we calculate the minimum transfer price in that particular case. And that is the idea about that. And that is one thing that you need to understand. 2, the absorption costing principle. It is also another fundamental thing that you need to understand. You have to understand it. In the absorption costing, you know that already, generally, if you're at this point, you know absorption costing. But the absorption costing principle, generally, it's looking at the issue in relation to where we are going to be looking at the full factory cost of inventories in that particular case. And so in that case, we are going to bring in both the fixed and the variable factory costs in the determination of the total production costs. And that is the default way because the absorption costing is in line with IAS 2 inventories, that inventories must be valued at full factory cost. But why is this important? Again, you will need it in profit statement preparation, because if you are going to be prepare profit statement, then we would have to deal with the absorption costing, because that is an alternative method that we can use instead of the marginal costing that we spoke about here. But when we are doing the profit statement and the absorption costing, it is important you understand something key, because we are going to be then dealing with issues in relation to over and under absorption of overheads. And it is important you understand how to deal with over and under absorption of overheads. When do we say overhead has been over absorbed? When do we say overhead has been under absorbed? And how do we treat it? You have to understand that, because the examiner can bring you a 10-mark question on the preparation of a profit statement using the absorption costing and the marginal costing. And if you are doing the absorption costing and you don't understand under and over absorption, and you don't understand how to calculate the cost of the inventory, then you're going to get ZOCPO at the end of the day. That is 0 at the end of the day. So understanding the absorption costing principle is very crucial. Not only that, under budgeting, we're going to need this. Under variance analysis, like I told you earlier, we're going to need this. The third thing generally is going to be the issue in relation to the activity-based costing. So this is where we are going to be absorbing overheads based on the activities. So it is important that under activity-based costing, you know what we call the cost drivers and then the cost pool. You have to know the cost drivers. So the cost drivers are the activities which causes the cost. The cost pool are the major activities that the entity is undertaking. And it is important you know the cost drivers and the cost pool, and you know how to deal with the allocation of the overheads under the activity-based costing principle. And these are the three, baby principles that you need to understand with the issue in relation to classification of cost. That is another key topic that you need to understand. Classification of cost. Because under classification of cost, you're going to be learning a lot of things. Classification of cost by nature, classification of cost by function, classification of cost by behavior. So that particular topic, classification of cost, will help you to understand various principles when it comes to dealing with management accounting. That is the second concern of the chief examiner in respect of this particular area that we are talking about here, that there is lack of understanding of principles and concept of management accompanying and poor interpretation of results. The poor interpretation of results there, it's at the end of the calculation, you would have to provide the interpretation. For instance, if you do an NPV project or you do an investment appraisal question, you have to write down the answer of what the entity should do. Should they proceed with a project or they should not? Should they go ahead with a project or they should not? All that is in your hand and you have to be able to state it down. Then the third thing in this particular examination diet is poor expression of English language in the presentation of written answers. I've already addressed this. I've been in this game for over a decade, and sometimes when I read what people write in our assignments, in our mock examination, in our performance evaluation test, when I read the English, the grammar, the context, the statements, the expressions, capitalization, and all of that, you wonder, like, how the heck do you write like that? I don't get it. But that is also a problem. That's one of the reasons why students fail the examination. So if you are preparing to sit for the management accounting exam in this examination diet, you have to be able to learn the English language very well. These are the first things that the chief examiner raised concern on in the November 2019 examination. And it applies, like I said, to everybody sitting for the management accounting exam. Clarity, understanding of the principle, then poor expression of English language. So let's look at a different examination date. So this is November 2019. Then fast forward 2 years, November 2021. I want you to see again the concern that the chief examiner raised in this particular case. Notable weaknesses. 1, poor handwriting makes it difficult to read what the candidates have written. 2, inability to present suggested solution in a well-structured and report form. 3, poor interpretation of results calculated. We've spoken about this. Bad expression of the English language. We've spoken about this. So you realize that this is the crux of the matter. This is the challenge. These are the reasons why students fail the management accounting examination. Then finally, April 2022, a couple of issues that the examiner spoke about here. Performance. Generally, the performance of this data was much improved than in 2021. This notwithstanding, candidates generally appear to have difficulty in dealing with questions that require the application of concepts learned to solve real problems. Application of the concepts, like I told you about, cost classification, basic marginal costing, absorption costing, the issues about short-term decisions. What are the principles? Also, the challenge of dealing with performance evaluation still persists. That is question 1. It's something that students are not able to do. Then candidates appear to have difficulty in expressing themselves or communicating their ideas. This was shown in their poor sentence construction and the struggle by the examiners to make meaning of sentences written by candidates. And I couldn't agree more with the chief examiner. Because, like I said earlier, sometimes my students, they have performance evaluation tests, assignments, or mock, and I'm trying to understand, trying to see what the heck are they trying to say. I tried to, like, I couldn't agree more with the chief examiner, because what is the person saying? Because there is a word missing, there is a wrong subject verb agreement, like you don't really understand what they are trying to say, and that ultimately makes you fail the examination. So you realize that the same problem cuts across irrespective of the examination dates that we are talking about. So going into this examination date, what are you going to do? Pretty simple. If these are why students fail the examination, then if you want to pass, take yourself out of these categories. Make sure you work on your expression, the English language expression. Make sure you work on that. Make sure you understand the principles, the basic concepts in management accounting. Spend time to solve a lot of questions, because it is one thing to think you know the principles, it's another thing to be able to actually answer questions in respect of the principles. That will require some sacrifices, that will require some dedications, that will require giving up a couple of things so you can position yourself in the few weeks that we have left for you to go in there, write the examination, and most importantly, pass the exam. Thank you for watching this episode. Remember to subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comment section which of these basic principles you would want me to talk about: the marginal costing principle, the absorption costing principle, the activity-based costing principle, cost classification. Let me know which of these topics you would want me to take in the comment section or the chat box, and I'll catch you in the next episode as we continue with our discussion.